time is now 5:30 p.m. on March 20th, 2019, and this public meeting of the State Board of Education will come to order. The roll call will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Mr. Battle, please call the roll.
Board Member Gasoy.
Present.
Board Member Jacobson.
Present.
Board Member Wadenberg.
Present.
Board Member O'Leary.
Present.
Board Member Parker. Board Member Parker. Board Member Sutter.
Present.
Board Member Williams. Board Member Williams. Board Member Batchelor.
He is on his way. He just called in. He'll be here soon.
Board Member McLay.
Present.
Board Member or Student Rep Alicia. Student Member Alicia. Student Member Robinson. Student Member Robinson. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. A quorum has been determined, and the State Board will proceed now with the business portion of the meeting. Members, we have a draft agenda before us. Are there any corrections or additions to the agenda? Seeing no changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right. The motion being properly moved and seconded, I will ask for the yeas and nays. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Say nay. Okay, the motion is approved. Members, we have the minutes from our March 6th working session before us. Are there any corrections or additions to those minutes? Seeing no changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
The motion being properly moved and seconded, I will ask for the yeas and nays. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, nay. Motion is approved. So good evening. My name is Ruth Wattenberg. I'm the Ward 3 representative and president of the State Board of Education. On behalf of the members of the District of Columbia State Board, I want to welcome our guests and our viewing public to our Wednesday, March 20th public meeting. The State Board holds its regularly scheduled meetings on the third Wednesday of every month at the Old Council Chambers right here at 441 4th Street Northwest. In addition to broadcasting this meeting live via the District Knowledge Network, we are also live streaming via Periscope on Twitter, and the video for the meeting will be posted on our YouTube page once the meeting concludes. Tonight's agenda includes the presentation of 3 ceremonial resolutions to recognize outstanding leadership and accomplishment. First, we will recognize the importance of Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action, which happened last month. Black Lives Matter at School is a national movement that works for racial justice in education and promotes restorative justice practices, important concerns of ours on the board, and issues that our ombudsman and student advocate offices are deeply engaged in. Second, we will consider a ceremonial resolution to recognize the vital role of women in our society by honoring Women's History Month. Women have been and remain the backbone of our school staff, so I want to thank all of these powerful women, teachers, administrators, counselors, cafeteria workers, aides, and more, who give so much to make our students' dreams possible. We will also consider a ceremonial resolution for the champions of the Class A and Class AA basketball tournament. We have reps here from 3 of the 4 schools present here tonight: Eastern, KIPP DC, and Sidwell Friends. Congratulations to all of you fantastic student athletes involved, and thank you to all of the faculty and staff that guided our teams this season. I'm also pleased to announce that the application process for our school year 2019-2020 student representatives who sit on our board and for the broader Student Advisory Committee is opening tonight. Our student reps provide the State Board of Ed with a direct link to classrooms where the real effects of our policies are felt by students. Last month, 2 of our students, Tatiana Robinson from Ballou and Emma Quigg from Basis, gave terrific, dramatic, heartbreaking testimony on the effects of high teacher turnover on students, leading to coverage of this very important issue. If you are interested or you know of a high school student at any DC public or public charter school who might be interested in serving on the State Board or on the committee, please direct them to apply via the link on our State Board of Ed website. The application will close on April 28th, 2019. The State Board is delighted that both our Deputy Mayor of Education, Paul Kine, and our new DCPS Chancellor, Louis Farabee, have said that addressing and improving DC's high turnover rates are important priorities. As those who follow us know, the board is developing proposals for how DC could and should collect data on this important issue so that we can all understand what's driving our very high rates of turnover and track progress as our agencies work to address it, especially in our highest poverty schools. We're going to hear tonight from experts on what other states and districts are doing to collect, report, and analyze this data. Finally, the State Board will consider 3 items related to the budget and administration of the agency. The first is a resolution laying out the priorities of the board. The second is adoption of our fiscal year 2020 enhancement requests. And I'll say more on this later, but let me note here that members of the public are invited to testify at the board's budget hearing on Wednesday, March 27th. Those interested in testifying can register to do so at the DC Council's website. Last, we will consider a revision to the State Board's bylaws that would increase transparency around any possible conflicts of interest. Under the new language, board members would transparently list their connections to DC area education groups on the website, plus any recusals would be announced prior to every board meeting. At this time, I would like to turn to our State Superintendent, Hansel Kang, for any comments she might have.
Thank you, President Wattenberg. Tonight, I would like to speak briefly on OSSE's newly released strategic plan, share some updates about programming of interest at the agency, and some brief thoughts on one of the resolutions before the board. When I first arrived at OSSE as the state superintendent in 2015, I outlined my vision for the agency. At the time, I envisioned a state education agency that carried out its core functions and operations at the very highest level of service, and an agency that worked in strong partnership with sister education agencies and stakeholders, including this body. That vision was further articulated in our strategic plan that guided the work of the agency over the past 4 years. Since then, OSSE has taken on significant challenges and made substantial improvements in a diverse and vibrant educational landscape, and I am proud of the progress we've made. That said, we continue to see troubling and persistent gaps in outcomes for far too many of our students, and know that if we are not able to change these trends, we will shortchange the future of our great city. Tonight, I would like to share a few highlights from our new strategic plan, which is available on our website, and which outlines the next phase of our work and includes specific and ambitious yet achievable goals that will advance outcomes for DC students. The specific goals we have set include that by 2023, we aim to have 1,500 more vulnerable infants and toddlers in quality childcare and 4,100 more students in high-quality pre-kindergarten classrooms. We will have 6,700 more students meet or exceed expectations on state assessments while closing achievement gaps, which will require that we accelerate the progress of the specific student groups who are currently furthest behind. And we will have 1,100 more students enroll in post-secondary education and be on a path to complete a 2- or 4-year degree. We have laid out a set of strategic pillars that sharpen and deepen our focus on particular areas that we think will particularly impact student outcomes. First, we will set and maintain high standards for program quality and high expectations for learners to ensure our educational systems are driving towards excellence and equity. Second, we will collect and share reliable and actionable data to inform policy decisions, empower our partners to improve, and build community understanding. Third, we will build ecosystem capacity, convene partners, including this board, provide targeted support, and invest resources to improve quality, increase access, and advance equity in education. And finally, we will maximize our impact through specific focus in early childhood education and in improving outcomes for students with disabilities. I continue to feel a deep sense of urgency around the very real challenges that still lie before us. We know that we have much more to do to support all of our students in reaching their full aspirations. This has motivated my efforts from the classroom to my current role as state superintendent, and it will continue to do so in the years ahead. Now I would like to move on to sharing news about some of our recent events at OSSE. OSSI, along with the DC STEM Network, hosted the 2019 DC STEM Fair on March 16th. The DC STEM Fair provides an opportunity for District of Columbia public charter, independent, and homeschooled students in grades 6 through 12 to showcase their knowledge of science, technology, engineering, and math. Students from across all wards of the city demonstrated their knowledge and skill in a range of creative and rigorous projects that involve research and analysis and engage students' curiosity and passion. More than 10 new schools competed at this year's event, including a team from River Terrace Education Campus, a DCPS school serving students with significant disabilities. The Senior Grand Awards this year went to students from Friendship Public Charter School, Technology Preparatory Academy High School, and the Junior Grand Awards went to students from Howard University Middle School for Mathematics and Science Public Charter School. I am also pleased to announce the launch of the Superintendent's Teacher Advisory Council, which met for the first time this week. The council will serve as a brain trust to ensure OSSI's policies are informed by classroom perspectives. The 17 members of the Teacher Advisory Council are DC teacher leaders who are champions for the profession and are passionate about closing the achievement gap, improving school climate, and preparing students for college and career. The teachers represent schools from across the city, including a number of DCPS and public charter schools, and you may find the list of participating teachers on our website. As you know, the mayor announced the FY20 budget for the District of Columbia. The budget proposal outlines the mayor's vision for the District of Columbia government for the upcoming fiscal year. It reflects months of preparation by district agencies and significant public engagement. It's important for the residents and education stakeholders to be aware of its components and take advantage of opportunities to engage on the budget. Each year that I've been in office, I've hosted a briefing on OSSI's proposed budget prior to my testimony before the DC Council. This year, our public briefing will take place on April 4th, 2019, from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. at OSSI's offices at 1050 First Street Northeast in the first floor Eleanor Holmes Norton Conference Room. We welcome state board members and interested stakeholders to attend. Please feel free to reach out to Justin Tooley on my staff to RSVP or for any questions about the event. OSSI's budget hearing before the DC Council will take place on April 9th, 2019. Finally, I am pleased to see that the board will vote on a resolution outlining its research and public input efforts for 2019. This will bring greater focus on the issues that are important to you as a board, and we look forward to continuing our ongoing partnership with you on many of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tonight, the State Board will be considering 3 ceremonial resolutions. We use these resolutions to recognize and honor people, schools, and items of note. I am going to hold back for a moment on the Black Lives Matter at Schools resolution because I'm waiting for Marcus Batchelor to arrive because he would like to move it. So let me ask, is there someone who could move the second ceremonial resolution recognizing the importance of women in our history through Women's History Month and the International Day of the Woman?
I'll go ahead and do that.
Thank you. Second? Okay. Having been properly moved and seconded, Mr. Battle, could you read the resolution?
State Board of Education ceremonial resolution recognizing Women's History Month, CR 19-7. Whereas Women's History Month spans March 1st to March 31st and encompasses International Women's Day on March 8th. Whereas International Women's Day was first recognized in 1911 and Women's History Month was designated by Congress in 1987. Whereas Women's History Month encourages the recognition and celebration of women and their roles in history, society, and culture, with a special focus on acknowledging and promoting public awareness of women whose lives and impact on society have historically been marginalized or overlooked in traditional narratives. Whereas Women's History Month elevates the premise that women, regardless of race, culture, or socioeconomic status, have impactful and important roles to play in promoting a fair and just society for all. And whereas the National Women's History Alliance has declared the theme of Women's History Month for 2019 to be, quote, visionary women, champions of peace and nonviolence, end quote. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the D.C. State Board of Education recognizes March as Women's History Month. Be it further resolved that the State Board recognizes the work of women in education, social work, social justice, healthcare, and other areas, whether in career roles or as volunteers, and be it finally resolved that the State Board acknowledges with gratitude these efforts to improve and inform the lives of district residents.
Thank you, Mr. Battle. Having been properly moved and having been read, is there discussion on the resolution?
I'm proud to see that we are recognizing Women's History Month as this month during our ceremonial resolutions. It's certainly something I am passionate about as I spend my my days and my daily work life working for women, families. Women today are passionate about issues such as education, and it is surely something that we as a board and the district residents should think thoroughly about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay, seeing no further discussion, the motion is on approval of the ceremonial resolution. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes have it. Okay, we are going to go now to our to the ceremonial resolution recognizing the hard work of our student athletes and coaches on 4 championship basketball teams. Can I have someone move that resolution?
I'll move that resolution.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Having been properly moved and seconded, Mr. Battle, please read the resolution.
State Board of Education ceremonial resolution recognizing the winners of the 7th Annual District of Columbia State Athletic Association DCSAA Basketball Championship, CR 19-8. Whereas the District of Columbia State Athletic Association DCSAA oversees and supports interscholastic athletics and high school sporting contests in the district. Whereas the 7th Annual Statewide Basketball Tournament officially began in November 2018 with 32 men's teams and 27 women's teams. Whereas the 4 state championship bracket games began on March 3rd, 2019. Whereas in the first DCSAA Class A tournament, Eastern High School's Lady Ramblers won the girls' title with a 46-41 win over Benjamin Banneker Academic High School. Whereas in the first DCSAA Class A tournament, KIPP DC College Preparatory won the boys' championship with a 55-47 win over the Seed Public Charter School. Whereas in the girls' Class AA title, the St. John's College High School Cadets won the championship title by beating Georgetown Visitation 63-38. And whereas in the boys' Class AA title, Sidwell Friends won 63-62 in overtime against Wilson High School. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the D.C. State Board of Education recognizes the efforts of the winning teams of the District of Columbia State Athletic Association Basketball Boys and Girls Championship and congratulates them on their respective victories.
Okay, the motion having been read. Is there discussion on the resolution?
Madam President, I'd like to say some things. So I'd like to congratulate all of the student athletes on your wins in the championships. We know how important student athletics is to our student body here in the district, how it builds leadership skills, how it builds all sorts of competencies that you will all take into your life beyond athletics. I want to give a special shout out to the Eastern High School Lady Ramblers from Ward 6, Pride of Capitol Hill. Very delighted and wore my blue just in honor of Ward 6. But am very excited to see all of the faces of all of our athletes here tonight, so many of our athletes, and absolutely delighted to congratulate you all on your wins.
And
I'd like to say something. As someone who coached in DCIAA for 40 years, I want to congratulate all of the winners and also the other teams that played, because I'm painfully aware of what you go through every day before the games, and I know how much you miss it now, and I'm sure that the seniors will have another 4 years when they go to college and play and be as successful as you are this year. And I think it's just wonderful that y'all are victors, because I know how hard it is to be a victor.
I also want to say something as the proud mother of a Wilson High School graduate. I want to congratulate the athletes from Sidwell Friends in what was a tremendously exciting game. And I also want to congratulate those on the Wilson team who lost by 1 point. Thank you very, very much, all of you, for being here. Our third, anybody else on this? Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'm new at this, guys, I just want to say. Seeing no further discussion, the vote is now on the approval of the ceremonial resolution. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes have it. Our third resolution is for the Black Lives Matters at schools, and I will turn to our Ward 8 member and Vice President Marcus Batchelor to make the motion.
Present and proud to motion, Madam President.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion having been properly moved and seconded, Mr. Battle, will you read the resolution into the record?
State Board of Education ceremonial resolution recognizing the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action, CR 19-6. Whereas Black Lives Matter at School is a national movement of educators, students, families, and community organizations working for racial justice in education. Whereas Black Lives Matter at School first began in 2016 in Seattle, Washington, and has since expanded to schools across the United States. Whereas the coalition seeks an end to zero-tolerance discipline policies in schools in favor of restorative justice practices. Whereas the coalition seeks to promote Black history and ethnic studies curricula, and the hiring of Black teachers and school counselors in greater numbers, whereas Black Lives Matter at School has brought about increased awareness of issues facing Black students and disseminated important lessons about Black history, Black identity, and structural racism to thousands of students in the District of Columbia and across the country. And whereas the Coalition's National Week of Action is held in the first week of February and took place this year from February 4th through February 8th, 2019. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the D.C. State Board of Education thanks the D.C. area educators and community members who participated in this year's Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. Be it further resolved that the State Board recognizes the ongoing work of the Black Lives Matter at School Coalition and its continued importance to the district students.
Thank you. Is there discussion on the resolution?
Madam President.
I recognize Representative Batchelor.
Thank you, Madam President. In the interest of recognizing some of the many organizations that have contributed to making this such a successful effort in the District of Columbia, but also I think to reflect this board's agreement that education, meaningful cultural engagement like this is important, not just for a week, but year-round, and for all of our students. I move in block amendments 1 and 2. And ask for a second.
Are you going to read does everybody have the amendments? Do we need to read them?
I can read.
Okay.
I can read them. Okay, Amendment 1. In line 27, replace the following. DC area educators and community members who participated in this year's Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action, and insert the following. Teaching for Changes, DC area educators for social justice and the Center for Inspired Teaching for coordinating the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action in the District of Columbia. Its 25 endorsers, including the Washington Teachers Union, Black Lives Matter DC, the Howard University School of Education, the more than 450 DC teachers in 150 schools that participated, the National Museum of African American History and Culture and publishers for their donations of more than 250 books for DC teachers and community members who provided support. Amendment 2. In line 33, insert the following. Be it finally resolved that the State Board invites educators across the grade levels and content areas to use inclusive resources to enrich instruction throughout the whole year, not just 1 week of the month or the month.
Thank you very much. Do you want to speak more, or should I call vote? Okay. Okay, I'm going to call the vote on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The ayes have it. Okay, now a vote on the entire resolution.
Madam President?
Yes.
Just very briefly, I'd like to just very briefly, and I think we did it with the reading and with the amendments, but really just thank all of the organizers. We've had recurring discussions on this board that have been brought by members of the public about the importance of culturally competent instruction and curriculum that really teaches our young people and their peers who they truly are, and opens the door for an exchange of culture and of understanding, and I believe that efforts like this are going to move us closer to that, and so I thank my colleagues' indulgence for recognizing all of these organizations in the amendment and in the underlying resolution, and thank all of the organizations and educators who contributed to this effort. So thank you.
Okay. Any other comments?
I would like to make a brief comment. First, I would just like to say, for transparency's sake, that I have worked for Center for Inspired Teaching and Teaching for Change. But I just want to speak to the really important work that all of these organizations have done to make Black History Month, the Black History Week of Action, Black Lives Matter Week of Action, such an effective initiative. And one of the things to speak to your comment, Mr. Batchelor, I think one of the really important things, I'm a parent at Yu Ying Public Charter School, and we're one of the participants in this initiative. And part of it is getting resources that do last throughout the year. And so it's not just about the week or the month, but it's about, now those books are in our schools, and now those lessons that teachers have learned are lessons that hopefully they're going to keep drawing on. So I do just want to thank all of the organizations that participated and continue the good work.
Thank you. Okay, all those in favor of the resolution as amended, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. The ayes have it. Okay, now we are going to take a break. If Rosalie Reyes from Teaching for Change, Accepting for Black Lives Matter at School, could come to the front. The State Board is going to take a 5-minute recess to present the resolutions and take some photos. Representatives from the 3 schools, please stay in your seats for a moment, and we're going to call you up next in the following order: Torrance Hill and Eastern High School, Trey Walker and KIPP DC, and Keith Leventhal and Sidwell Friends. So the State Board stands in recess.
Natural, man.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashley, for. All right. Great. Thank you so much. Who's the next? So are the folks from Eastern High School come up front and take your picture, please? We could all stand, yeah. Yeah. Actually, let's leave these chairs out for the photo. And if I can get everybody to kind of crouch in, please. Jack, if you could, yes, good. As close as you can. Great. Great. Thank you. Awesome. Yes, yes. Great. Congratulations. And so will the representatives from KIPP DC come up, please? All right, if everyone could crowd towards the center of the room, please. Yes, please.
Savion, shift, Savion, shift this way. Thank you.
There you go. All right, congratulations. And then the folks from Sidwell Friends, come on up. So I need the really tall guys in the back, and then the shorter folks in the front. Towering. Got it. Congratulations.
Rock star. One last time.
All right, let's go. I have another meeting at 7:30. And I'm like,
All right,
I'm gonna
are we ready,
miss,
guys?
Like the last part of the meeting, yeah.
All right. Our recess is ending. Thanks to all of our athletes and coaches.
Even better. There's no romance.
State
going on
Board
these days.
welcomes public participation in
they already
activities
happened.
under our authority. At every public meeting, we begin with testimony from public witnesses on education-related matters. Your comments will become part of our official record. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak at a future public meeting, please contact our staff by email at sboe@dc.gov or by calling 202-741-0888. Tonight, we have 3 public witnesses. If witnesses have provided written comments for the record, they are available on our website. We have 1 panel of witnesses tonight. As I call your name, please come down to the table. Laura Fuchs, WTU COPE Chair. Lakeisha Davis Small, visionary of Stop Stealing Our Souls movement, and Ronald Thompson Jr., DC resident. Oops. Thank you all for being here. You each have 3 minutes to speak this evening. Please note that you must use your microphone. Your mic is on, and it helps to move the mic so that it is about 6 inches from your mouth. The light on the table will be green for the first 2.5 minutes. It will turn yellow for the last 30 seconds, and it will turn red after 3 minutes have elapsed, and by then you should be done with your remarks. We will begin on your left and my right. Please begin when you are ready. Ms. Fuchs.
All right, my name is Laura Fuchs. For the past 12 years, I've taught at H.D. Woodson High School. Today I'm coming to you both demoralized and hopeful. Demoralized because this city is allowing neighborhood public schools to slip down the drain. Demoralized because despite hearing the word equity everywhere, our city clearly doesn't understand the difference between equity and equality. Demoralized because if we let this go on much longer, neighborhood public schools east of the river will cease to exist. I'm hopeful, in part due to the actions of this board on the ESSA task force in trying to get budget transparency data to our families for all of our LEAs so that we can better advocate within and outside of our schools. I am hopeful in part due to legislation introduced at the City Council, which will begin the discussion of what information should be shared from our charter sector to bring it in line with the information we have on DCPS. I am hopeful that our DCPS chancellor and the new deputy mayor won't repeat the mistakes of our previous chancellors and DME, who think that unlimited competition will solve all our problems and that large overhead is necessary to keep our schools in line. I'm calling on all the SBOE members to join us in the fight to invest in our neighborhood school system. The system of choice cannot exist if there are no neighborhood public schools that a student has a right to attend in easy traveling distance. You can support us in many ways. 1, wear red for Ed on Fridays for March and April in support of investing fair and equitable funding for our local schools. You can sign and share a petition from the Washington Teachers Union. You can sign up your ward residents and help them prepare to testify on behalf of your local schools at the public DCPS budget hearing on Friday, March 29th, ideally wearing red. We will be calling for an additional increase in the UPSFF for the mayor's proposal of 2% to 4%. We also would like an increase in at-risk special education and English language learner weights. We're also asking DCPS for a restoration of stabilization funds for the schools that are facing the largest cutbacks. We can't retain teachers if we can't retain a budget. This has been consistently the case year after year after year. Last year at Woodson, we had to make major cuts to staff, accessing several. The year before, we had to cut staff, but were able to limit it to those who are already planning to retire. DCPS Central Office has consistently grown in size and cost. They should cut back on their spending instead of robbing our local schools to continue their opaque programming. We need your support. Help us amplify our request to fix the DCPS local budgets immediately so that the schools that need the most support don't see the biggest cuts. And then help make sure that all our LEAs are being more transparent about the funding choices they are making. Thank you.
Thank you. Keisha Davis-Small.
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank all of you for allowing me to testify today. I am a Washingtonian born and raised. I went to the former Scott Montgomery Elementary School, Shaw Junior High School, and Cardozo Senior High School. Now I am a sexual assault and domestic violence advocate. I started a movement called Stop Stealing Our Souls, putting an end to sex exploitation. And, you know, I go into the schools and I mentor some of the students at the National Collegiate Preparatory School in Southeast. And I have experienced with the students that they suffer from a lot of trauma and pain. And being as though I'm a certified victim service provider, I've learned that trauma and memory is held within your body. So when you don't properly process the trauma, it affects your behavior. It also affects your grades and how you interact with other students. So with my movement, I want to educate, motivate, and advocate to help the students focus, because if they're experiencing these traumas at home and no one is able to educate them or help them deal with it, you know, you'll see failing grades, behaviors. I'm sure you see a lot in DC public schools. I'm also a survivor of sexual abuse, so I'm coming from a place of experience, but also education, because I'm certified with the University of Baltimore Criminal Justice Department, in which I was trained with police officers, social workers, et cetera. However, I am part of the National Black Coalition. Dr. Ife Williams nominated me for that position to bring awareness to sexual abuse in our communities. So I walk alongside with her organization, with our organization. And, you know, I'm here just speaking from the heart. I really want to help. You know, I work in the district. I've been in situations on the train where I've had to break up fights with groups of with teenage girls I don't know. But I understand where this is coming from. They do not know how to process their pain. They don't know what to do with their frustrations. And I'm a living witness to say, hey, it happened to me. Let me show you what I've done to help myself, so I'm sure it's hope for you. And I grew up in a very crime, drug-infested neighborhood in Northwest DC, but I was able to come out, and I'm sure that they can also. So I'm hopeful that you all will allow me to help them, because that's what I'm here for. I'm a servant to help. So that's my testimony.
Thank you very much. Ronald Thompson.
Good evening. I had a written, prepared statement that I did not bring with me, and I didn't submit for the record, and it was on the subject of food insecurity and the role that our LEAs play in ensuring that students have adequate food at school, that they're receiving the nutrition that they need during the school day. But I, through some conversations today, wanted to shift my discussion because I believe that the issue of transparency relates to what I intended to talk about. The council intends to pass legislation that would level the playing field for our LEAs between the public school, the DC public school sector, and the charter school sector. As an individual who lives in Ward 8, but traveled to schools in Ward 6, I attended Peabody Elementary. I attended Peabody for kindergarten. I attended Watkins Elementary, and then Stewart Hobson. And then I returned to Ward 8 my 7th grade and the beginning of my 8th grade year to Kramer. I graduated in 2016 from Dunbar Senior High School. Seeing the change in my nearly 15 years of education, Ward 8 now has 23, or if the numbers that I looked at earlier are correct, 23 charter schools in Ward 8 alone. The majority of our students are now served by charter schools. Meanwhile, Kramer, the school that I attended, has seen enrollment dip. According to a person I participated in an internship and working in the same office space as her, she stated to me that teacher turnover is an issue at Kramer. Mm-hmm. I have great concerns about the investments that we're making in our schools, especially in the charter sector. DC Public Schools has been transparent and open for as long as I have been a student at DC Public Schools. And I think that the FOIA process has been a vital tool in ensuring that DCPS is open, that we know what was going on. The antagonistic relationship, is some have called it, between between individuals who do FOIA requests and governmental bodies. That process is important. It was important for me. At Dunbar, we had several issues at Dunbar, and I think that there's a story out of Connecticut, I believe, of a charter operator, some inappropriate behavior by staff at a principal at one of those schools, and the antagonistic relationship between the media, the press, and the charter system there helped reveal that to the public, that this was a problem. We need that same relationship, because you cannot have a trust in a system where now a majority of kids in an entire ward are serviced by a charter sector, and there is not public accountability for public dollars. And I think that this body should support the initiative of transparency across the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there members of the board who would like to comment or ask questions? Mr. Jacobson?
Thank you, Madam President. Like you, Ms. Fuchs, I wore red for ed today, additionally, so thank you so much for bringing that up. Ms. Davis-Small, I wanted to thank you so much for coming here tonight, sharing your story, and for being a leader in our communities. It means a lot to me personally, and it means a lot to this board. The board has been historically very active on trauma, gun violence, safety. When we helped rewrite DC's health education standards to make them the gold standard in the country, we made sure that gun violence and safety as well as suicide prevention and self-harm, and all of this trauma-informed issues were right at the top of the list, and we worked really closely with advocacy organizations and with students. I don't really have a question for you, but if you had any more reflection or any more to say, you've got another 2 minutes of my time.
Oh, great. Thank you. I do. So, since the R. Kelly documentary came out, there has been a mass, I want to say, number of people being triggered that have been sexually abused. And I get calls all the time. People are scrambling, trying to figure out how to stay above water and how not to drown. They don't know what to do, and I have the answer. My movement consists of clergy, psychologists. I have some police officers that signed up to be a part of the movement, but my goal is to help those that are triggered to know, first of all, that they are triggered, that, you suffer some from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which causes forgetfulness or behavioral issues, different things. But if they cannot identify or understand the root of the problem, it will continue to perpetuate itself. And I'm sure you can see with grades and the students' behaviors, you're wondering, well, why are they acting this way, or what is the problem? And some of them, even males, have been sexually abused, and they're hypersexual. So they don't want to appear to be a certain way because they were touched by a man. So they tend to have babies, they tend to have a lot of girlfriends, or you have young women who are very promiscuous. They don't know what to do, and I want to help them understand what to do, the neuroscience of it all. What happens to your mind, your body, is not just an act, a physical act. It's a mental, emotional act. Once the person has committed the crime, they're gone, but the pain is still there. So my movement is Stop Stealing Our Souls, because it's almost as if they're trying to find their soul in the daytime with a flashlight.
Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Others? Emily?
Hi, thank you all for your testimony. First, Ms. Fuchs, thank you for your tireless advocacy. I guess my question for you is where to start. I know that this is a chronic issue that around the budgets, and I'm hearing a lot about it right now from the schools in Ward 1, that this is something for some of them that's very predictable. Mm-hmm. So, I'm trying to parse out, where do you begin in terms of advocacy around this?
I mean, right now, it's the city council's turn with the budget now that the mayor has submitted it. So, I mean, the schools ourselves, we have to keep trying to push DCPS, keep asking them, keep reaching out. Sometimes we get gifted positions. That's not a fix, but it at least can temporarily reduce harm. Because, I mean, unfortunately, the positions that were gifted disappear the next year. So, I mean, there's churn that doesn't even show up on the budget sheet. And so, yeah, I mean, DCPS is transparent, but up to a point, and we want to push them to be even more transparent. Then at the council level, obviously reaching out to council members, they have the power to line item stuff to your school if it's necessary. Like if DCPS refuses, they choose not to exercise that frequently. The only time I've ever seen it is actually in Woodson's case, when they gave us $200K for STEM funding. That was from David Catania. He was about to run for office. And we'd made a real big stink that we were called the STEM school and had 0 specialty funds for 2 years running under the title STEM school. While every other specialty school did have specialty funds, we had 0. So it is possible, it can be done. Again, that's not really a real fix because it's temporary. That's a one-time line item. We didn't get it again. And we knew that was a likelihood. And then I think, we're going to have to try to push the council, and I think you guys are a great voice for that, to have a bigger discussion about funding and where it's going, and trying to really get to the root of that, because I just don't think all of our LEAs are being very honest about how much they're spending on central office-like activities. and how large a percentage that is of all of their budgets. I mean, I think DCPS is fundamentally dishonest, and we don't know anything at all about charter LEAs. So I guess that's kind of moving forward after. But we got to get through this budget process, and that means going to the council, public testimony, reaching out to council members and lobbying them. And then we get a whole another month to try to push DCPS before they come in front of the council to try to get them to do the right thing.
Thank you. Can I ask a question to
You have
Ms.
4 seconds.
Davis? Oh, okay. Quickly, Davis Small. I was just wondering, I'm sure about the bill for creating funding for more mental health services, right? And I'm just wondering if you have advice about how to direct that specifically to serve students who have suffered from sexual assault.
So, in my thoughts, if we create a program that is mandatory for all DC public schools to teach them about good touch, bad touch, emotional intelligence, that is necessary, how to process and deal with irrational thoughts or feelings. If you were able to fund programs that would support that, I think it will make a great difference. It will make a great difference, shall I say, in the behavior and even the grades of your students. I really know that for a fact. I've been working with some students, and the more that I talk to them and get them to be able to process their feelings, their grades have gone up. You know, their behavior is better. They think before they react, you know? So I know that it's working, and I know that it worked for me. So I'm my first subject. So I don't teach or try to educate anyone on anything that I haven't done myself. So I know it's possible. And it just takes patience and compassion and love, and I have it to give. And love has no color. So I don't care if they're Asian, Black, white, Indian, if they have been hurt. I want to help them process that pain. So if your bill is able to help implement these programs where I can give them intense, not just surface talk, but intense talk about sexual abuse and domestic violence, I believe that you will save so many children, and you will see the grades come up. Because again, like I stated, the body holds memory and trauma. And if you've experienced more than 4 traumas, your body starts to ache. You get sicknesses, diseases, because you don't know how to process that pain. So it stays trapped in you. So while you're trying to remember remember something for your test or something for school, whatever the case may be, it interrupts the cognitive thinking.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam President?
I have Fraser on that end.
I'm prejudiced towards Miss Davis Small because she was one of my students, and she's done.
Everybody was one of your students.
And it's just fabulous listening to you. It's not fabulous listening to what you're saying, because this is a tremendous problem in our schools, and finding out who you are is so important for students, and so many students don't have an outlet to be able to express how they feel. You've said enough, I think, Lakeisha, about that. I wanted to ask one question of Mr. Thompson, and that is, when you talked about transparency, several of us were at the press conference last week about the transparency, the bill that's going before the City Council. And that's really the only way that we are going to be able to find out who we are as a system, since we on the State Board of Education do some kind of oversight over both the DCPS and the charter schools, but we don't know what's going on. And I just wanted to mention one thing that Ms. Fuchs was talking about as far as the budget is concerned, and just to get your response, and a very quick response. about the security money that all of a sudden appeared for all of the schools. Could you just talk about that? And you got like whatever
I can
time
do it
I
real
have
quick.
left.
So basically, schools now have a security line item on their budgets that was formerly in the DCPS central budgets line items. And this reduced our stabilization funds because it made it seem like we were getting more money than in fact we are while we're getting the same services. And so it's effectively a cut for those of us who are used to receiving stabilization funds to make sure that we don't have to cut teaching positions.
And that's something that everyone should know about, because it really does. The schools got their budgets late, and they had to turn them in early, so the turnaround time was ridiculous, and now they're suffering for it all over the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sutter?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fuchs, for testifying tonight. I'll be wearing my red on Friday. Thank you so much, Ms. Davis-Small, for being here. I want to turn my attention to Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, nice to see you in person. We interacted a bit on Twitter today, so I'm delighted that you are here in person and that I get to say hello. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the transparency issue that you've raised and highlight one concern I have and then ask a question of you. So in our interaction today on Twitter, we were talking about the transparency legislation that's been proposed and specifically around the issue of FOIA. And I had shared that I worry whenever someone proposes policy and says it's all to the good. This policy will only be good, no bad can come of it, it will be great. Because I think, and I've studied policy and I've been around the ed world for a while, that all policy has benefits and drawbacks. And if the benefits outweigh the drawbacks, then those are drawbacks we may have to deal with. But I always get nervous when people sort of don't talk about the drawbacks and only talk about the benefits. So you had asked me a question that I didn't get to respond to in today, and I wanted to share it now, about what I was concerned about with the burdens that might come from this. So I have heard, both from schools in DC as well as schools outside of DC who have FOIA applied to them, that it initially yields a number of requests that the school has to answer, and the school does not necessarily have the personnel in place to do so. So for instance, standalone charter schools don't typically have a general counsel, and they may not have the legal personnel on board to do the FOIA requests. So my concern is not that FOIA be applied or not applied, but that we're thinking about how those schools are going to deal with those requests. Yesterday, I asked people to share with me the kinds of requests they're thinking about making, and I got quite a list from a number of people on Twitter of about the kind of things they want. So I do think there's a foundation for the fact that schools will initially see a lot of FOIA requests. I hope that would even out over time. My question to you is, given what we heard from Ms. Fuchs about budgets and transparency for DCPS, are there other ways, in addition to this request for transparency, that you think we need to be working to improve the public's voice in education, or will transparency be enough?
So, I have, and I'm not, I don't have a degree. I'm still working on my college degree, on my undergraduate work. I'm not an expert. I'm not a genius, but I know I've watched government work in this city. I've watched it work across the country. I know full well that what needs to happen in the District of Columbia is that we need to reassert local public control of our schools. Mayoral control has not worked. It has not worked. I say that as a product of the mayoral control experiment. It has not worked. That's the bottom line. So that's the first step. But we have to rethink what it means to be education in DC, because we have given so much power to the mayor. We have an appointee of the mayor here sitting in a body with elected officials that only have purview over policy issues. We don't have this. I don't believe this body can issue subpoenas. It cannot call members of the charter community to testify. It cannot call members of DCPS to testify, to give information. That would solve some of the issues of FOIA, because this body, if it had the powers to do so, would be able to call members of the education community in the District of Columbia before it and ask the necessary questions that I have asked as a student. Why mid-year do we have so many students coming from Maryland, from charter schools, into Title I at-risk schools like my high school, like Dunbar, like Kramer. And at Kramer, we had a civilizations, a history teacher that when I was at Stuart Hobson acted as a sub, and she was in a permanent position. I spent half the year with no science teacher, and it wasn't until my mother came up to the school and kept calling and kept bugging that we finally got a science teacher, and they told my mother, you know, you're kind of annoying. But those are the issues that we need to be asking ourselves. Where do we want to go in education? And my bottom line as a graduate of the mayoral control system is that we need to return to local control where people have the right to choose their education leaders. That's the bottom line. And if we did that tomorrow, I would shut up about 4 years.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Good luck with your continuing studies, and I think you're quite eloquent, so I wouldn't sell yourself short.
Thank you. Other, exactly. And can I just say, I'm been very lenient on the time to everybody. So the way it's supposed to work is each member gets a question and an answer that's supposed to be within the 3 minutes. So, sorry to start with you, but.
Thank you all for coming and using this as an opportunity to speak truth to power, but also as a bully pulpit to advance very important issues. As I hear the different stories and narratives from each of you, I'm very proud that you're here and pushing these different agendas, if you will. Ms. Fuchs, if I could start with you. I'm gonna just throw out questions, and then if you all can just rapid fire, just to save time. Ms. Fuchs, you already answered the question around how might it be perceived we have budget increases, yet schools are feeling a decrease, so thank you for that. The question I would then have is, I've heard from some schools with this proposal for one-to-one computer access in grades 3, 6, 9, that's gonna free up money. I don't know if that has been translated or if that's actually being felt in all schools, so if you could speak to that, and if so, to what extent or amount of money that might free up to cover the cost of some of those teachers. Something else I'm wondering, just genuinely, if a school is gifted a certain amount of funds 1 year, why then they might choose to fund I get why you would fund a teacher, but if that's not guaranteed funding year after year, why then would you put someone on the chopping block for that money not to potentially be there next year? So I'm just throwing that out there. Ms. Davis-Small, thank you for coming and sharing your story and your courageous work. Last month, we passed a resolution affirming the need for trauma supports in our schools, and so the work that you're speaking to and that you're engaging in is very much affirmed by this body, which I'm proud of. We had a organization that was here, and the name is escaping me. I'm sure my colleagues will remind me. But I would encourage you, and maybe after this meeting I can connect you all, but some of the grassroots approaches that they're working towards might be something of interest to you. I also know that the mayor, it is my understanding that the mayor in her budget proposed, I believe it was 7 million, 6 or 7 million towards trauma supports. Don't quote me on that, I could be wrong. And obviously we want and need more, but I think that might go a long way. And so my question to you is, based on your experiences, are there any priorities for a very small, limited amount of funds that might be meeting our schools where you might prioritize those funds? And then lastly, Mr. Thompson, again, thank you. I will not touch the FOIA issue. I think my colleagues have already spoken to it. I agree that we need transparency. That said, transparency should not come at the expense of student learning. So I too am sensitive to the impact that meeting FOIA requests might have on personnel and students' education. That said, what is next? And so let's say FOIA is granted tomorrow. You spoke about removing or moving away from mayoral control. What is next, I guess, is the general question, because I too agree with you that I am concerned with the direction of our neighborhood schools. I do think we need to invest in them broadly. I know I'm running short on time, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the article that just came out that DC is the highest or the most intensely gentrifying city in the country. I do not think it is by happen chance that our charter sector and our neighborhood school sector is at a heightened tension because of it. And so if you could just speak to that in context of what is next, that would be helpful.
I just want to say that you are 48 seconds over your question time, let alone your answer time, but you have a generous colleague. Lucky for you.
Yes, so thank you, Madam President. So I'm going to give most of my time for our panelists to answer those questions that I would for sure like the answer to. I just want to thank you, Ms. Fuchs, for always talking about our school's budgets. I look forward to working with the Ward 8 Education Council in my community to really advocate on behalf of our schools, some of which are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not over $1 million in cuts from last year, and in a community that desperately needs that support. That is unacceptable. To Ms. Davis-Small, thank you for your words. Obviously, sexual assault, mental health is something that, like my colleague said, we took up last month, and we look forward to that. And I talked about underscoring compliance to make sure that schools are adhering to the rules and the supports that are already on the books so that our students don't fall through those cracks. And to Mr. Thompson, my constituent, who I know will always stay on my back, and I appreciate it. Thank you for your advocacy around transparency, and obviously there are many folks up here who are beating that same drum, and will continue to do that because families can't have confidence in our system if they don't have the information they need to make proper choices and advocate for change. So thank you for that, and with that, I'll yield the remainder of my time to answer those.
So on the tech budget issue, we've been cut so many times in so many years, that thing's been zeroed out for a long time. So no, that doesn't help those schools that have been facing cuts year over year over year.
Gotcha.
As nice as that would be. McKinley Tech is a different school than H.D. Woodson. And I love them, and they should never get a cut either. But we are facing something real severe east of the river. And then cutting positions and gifts. Frankly, we're playing chicken with DCPS. We have to cut positions every single year. Every single year we cut positions. And so we have to play chicken. We have to cut something we hope they will gift us back because we cannot do without it.
Rhetorical question, how many positions at central office is being cut?
I mean, honestly, Brett, I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like any to me.
Yeah.
So the funding should go to emotional intelligence training for the staff and also coping, emotional intelligence coping for the students.
So, like I said to Representative Souter, the bottom line is we have to end mayoral control, and that is going to be a long process. And like I said, if this body, if I had confidence in this body to be able to subpoena, to receive information, to collect information, to put before the people of the District of Columbia, if I had faith in the Charter School Board as the authorizing authority of charters to ask the necessary questions that I want answers to, because I have a niece and a nephew, one that will my nephew will graduate from a charter. I have a cousin that's in a charter. I have another niece that graduated. I have a deep connection to this. So if I had faith in that, this body, to ask the questions that I want answers to, I don't think we need FOIA. So that's what it has to, mayoral control has to end. That's the bottom line.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? I have one. I'm going to cede most of my time to the previous people, but I'm going to ask one question to Ms. Fuchs. And thanks so much to all of you. It's been a terrific conversation. The reason I'm not asking you more is because we have to move on. But I wonder, Ms. Fuchs, if you could just say specifically what your school is going to lose in the budget.
Sure. So it is a fluid document, so things do change. We're losing one social studies teacher, one science teacher. Good Lord, that one's a tough one. We're going to lose a behavior tech. We're losing an assistant principal. We are cutting our special education coordinator. We're really hoping they'll gift that back, but so far they haven't. So we're running with that one. We're cutting, so the two that we did get gifted back was a counselor and a social worker. A counselor and an instructional coach. They wouldn't let us cut the social worker position, which, I mean, I understand, but at the same time, like, we're trying to figure out where this money's coming from. And I mean, a part of it is we're prioritizing teaching staff because we are going to receive, and we have received this year, over 100 students mid-year. And if we cut too much teaching staff, and then that happens again, what are we going to do? Like, I mean, we're really just at a loss, and we're already operating at capacity for our special education teachers, and we are cutting a special education teacher. Yeah, I mean, it's just, and then like we slashed our our supply budget, which was already as bare bones as we could possibly make it. Like, we run out of soap frequently. 50% cut. I mean, like, this is and like they were still trying to find things. Like, we were still negotiating for a week trying to figure out like what to get back and what to cut. So I mean, it's just out of control this year. I've never seen it quite like this. It's always been bad, but this is next level for Woodson.
Any other comments or questions? Let me just say thank you on behalf of all of us to all of you. 3 wonderful discussions on the budget, trauma, transparency, all of which all of us are thinking about all the time. So I really, really appreciate you coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The DC State Board is an independent voice on education for the city's public school families and residents. District residents expect the State Board to bring their ideas, concerns, and needs to the attention of city leaders and especially to the state policymaking process. Having panels of witnesses at our public meeting is one way to ensure that the public and State Board have access to research and information from a variety of sources. Teacher retention is a significant issue in the District of Columbia and disproportionately so in our highest poverty schools. Many of you have heard me say this before. 1/4 of our schools leave their school annually. This is higher than the national average of about 16%, and in schools with the highest percentages of at-risk students, 1/3 of teachers leave annually. And in Ward 8, 78% of teachers left their school after 5 years. Before 5 years, I should say. In each case, kids and their education are hurt. One clear finding from our report is how little data is available. We don't report turnover data at the school level at all. To combat this problem, we need a fuller, clearer picture of the problem. Tonight's panel is made up of experts from nonprofits and national associations who can help our board understand the kind of data that is needed and how we can use it to strengthen teacher retention. As I call your name, please come down to the witness table. Abigail Potts, Director of College, Career, and Civic Readiness from our national organization, the National Association of State Boards of Ed. Thomas Gensel, Executive Director and CEO of the National School Boards Association. And Elizabeth Aaron, CEO of Urban Schools Human Capital Academy. Thank you all for being here. Similarly to the public witnesses earlier, you'll be timed tonight. Each of you will have 5 minutes to present, and then we will have 2 3-minute rounds of questions from board members, so give us a chance to talk. Okay, we're beginning here with Ms. Ahrens, because I start from my right, unless you have a different.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So first of all, thank you for including us. We are a nonprofit organization that works with human capital and human resources offices all over the country in mostly urban, but also rural school districts as well as charter management organizations. So we are very familiar with one of the issues that we almost always start with, and that is what data do you have around your human capital, and how does that data inform your work? And of course, teacher retention is very high on the list of data that we're always seeking when we begin working with our urban districts. We're in about 35 deeply, that means 3 to 5 years working with districts, so we've become very familiar with this issue and how it relates to all the other human capital issues around recruitment, hiring, development, et cetera. Retention is a very complex subject, and when you track data, you have to distill it in many ways to make it meaningful. And that includes data school by school, because often within a district, we'll see a huge variation around data. Not all retention is good, and not all turnover is bad. And we're very clear with our districts about effective teachers in front of every student are the most important factor. And if you have a teacher who is ineffective, that often is someone that you do not want to retain if they don't improve. And we find our districts always talking about retention with one number, and you cannot do that. You have to say, let's say you retain 90% of your teachers, but how many of them were actually effective? So we need to know that data. We talk about that as strategic retention. We also look at movers, not just leavers, people leaving the system, but who's moving from one school to another, especially in a large district like Los Angeles or Palm Beach or New York, where we've been working, and we take a look at where teachers are migrating from one school to another. It's important to know that ineffective teachers in the research with 9 or more years of experience often indicate that they intend to stay for another 10 years. So it's important to know that when you have a retirement system, there are many teachers who will stay on despite being low performing. And finally, turnover is so expensive. It's $1 to $2 billion a year in replacing the numbers of teachers. It is a joint process. The central office must own retention along with individual schools, and not just the leader of the school, but everyone in the school, because that culture and climate is often the reason that a teacher will depart a particular school. We look at on-ramp. Are they traditional or alternatively certified? We look at high and low need schools, We definitely look at millennials, which are really changing the picture of how long anyone stays in any profession, not just teaching. We look at shortage fields. Are we losing more special ed, math, science than we are elementary? We look at diversity and gender. We are absolutely losing more African American teachers every year than we are white teachers. And so that is a huge issue for many of our districts. And we look at experience. Are they beginning, middle, or end of their career? They all want, we have found in the research, great leaders to work for. And they will walk over hot coals for great leaders. They want growth in their profession. They want recognition for quality work done, meaningful compensation and benefits, and a collaborative working environment. And all of the research points to the climate in that school and whether or not they will be retained in that environment. Finally, retention is often individual and personal. One size does not fit all. And it's really critical. We work a lot with principals to help them have a retention strategy individually, teacher by teacher, counselor by counselor. And it has to be a strategic part of the central office as well.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Tom Gensel, Executive Director at the National School Boards Association, and I really do want to thank you for inviting this testimony. The material that we've submitted, including some before this evening, is assembled by our Center for Public Education, which is a research arm for NSBA. This issue, and I commend you for having this hearing, this is an issue that's affecting school districts all over the country. We hear this from school board members and administrators. There are real challenges in recruiting and retaining certainly high-quality teachers. But this is no longer just a matter for kind of the traditional areas where we've always seen these shortages. I think we're seeing this now happening in high needs and subject areas, as you just heard, including math, science, special ed, and English language instruction, to cite a few. So we provided some materials for you, but one of the things I think we can draw from this discussion is that this is a complex problem. There are a lot of elements to it, including the preparation of the teacher's experience when they're going through those programs, the working conditions and the culture of the schools they enter, and certainly, and I think quite importantly, the early experiences, their first few years in the classroom, the supports that they receive. You had asked us to bring you information about how data systems can support this effort and some examples. So I'm going to sound real smart, like I know all these personally, but I can tell you that our research staff does, and so we'll be happy to share more information with you. But here are a few examples. The Central Falls School District in Rhode Island and the Kokomo School Corporation in Indiana have examined data to determine root causes of some of these challenges that we're talking about. In Mississippi, the Holmes and Yazoo County School Districts completed a comprehensive audit of teacher or educator talent data, resulting in better data collection, which is now leading actually to a statewide initiative in Mississippi. The well-respected, certainly, Learning Policy Institute, the Southern Region Education Board have also documented more examples of the kind of collaboration that we're talking about. I think quite interestingly, as we lay out in the testimony, there are a number of examples now of school systems that are partnering with teacher preparation programs, and including data sharing. This is important, I think, because the programs, often colleges and universities, really do need to know about the success or the challenges that the teachers they're delivering into the system are doing, and to know what the expectations of the school systems are. So these kinds of partnerships can allow good information to go back and forth and to talk and have a great understanding about the climate and the experiences that teachers are going to have when they enter your school system and others. There was a report from 3 years ago now from Education First, which cited 7 partnerships between school districts and teacher preparation programs in places like Arizona and Boston, Denver, California, Louisiana, and Oregon. Many more have been developed since then, according to our research. Education First has also compiled tools to support these partnerships, as well as a toolkit for building them. So I think one of the major takeaways from all this is there is good work being done. I don't think there's a magic elixir that's been invented yet, but certainly I think a lot of school systems and other partners are working, I think, quite actively to develop the kind of information sharing and data sharing that will inform that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Potts.
Well, first,
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm from the National Association of State Boards of Education. Whoops, there we go. And we are excited to talk about how every classroom can have an effective teacher leading it and be supported by a skilled instructional leader. My remarks may cover topics that you've already talked about, but I hope I can translate how research and findings are being linked and prompting state policy and practice changes. First, I just want to say that you're focusing on the right issue. We know from research that the most important school-based factor in student achievement is the teacher. We further know that teachers cite that principal support is one of the most important factors in their decision to stay in the school and in the profession. And DC is not alone in facing retention challenges and the interrelated issue of teacher shortages at high-need schools in specific subject areas. Nearly every state of the nation has a shortage in a specific field or on high-need schools. And recent research reveals high rates of attrition for teachers with less than 5 years of experience. And there are several state boards that are engaging practitioners alongside a rigorous review of data to address this issue. For example, South Carolina's Committee on Teacher Retention and Recruitment recommended legislation on salary increases, high-quality mentoring and induction programs, and additional learning opportunities for mid- and late-career teachers. Virginia State Board of Education is developing a profile of a Virginia educator to set a vision for teacher expectations that aligns this work across a multitude of areas that are equally important: preparation programs, professional development, induction, mentoring, and evaluation. Second, you're diving deeply into the data, which is important. Good policy making requires unpacking which subjects, which schools, what grade levels, what student services, such as special education and services for English language learners, are where surges rise and retention can decline. You're looking not just at when teachers leave, but what types of teachers are leaving and which schools they are leaving from. Effective policy solutions are always supported by statewide data systems that synthesize data on teacher development from a variety of state and local sources. As an example, the Kansas State Board of Education regularly hears reports on teacher vacancies and the supply subcommittee data on teacher retention. And they use that data to measure whether or not their strategies that they're implementing are having the desired outcomes. Teacher diversity data is also important too. Students of color benefit from having a teacher that looks like them. Mississippi is working on this research to translate those findings into policy and engaging with their teacher preparation programs to integrate culturally responsive training and pedagogy into their curriculum. And by the way, this is a lot longer than the staff thought I could speak at, so we're trying to clip through it. We also have data and research coming from the Wallace Foundation on the principal pipeline effect, on student achievement and principal retention, which are key to solving the teacher retention issue. A skilled school leader sets the tone for the climate of a school as one that supports and empowers teachers in their shared responsibilities for students. And teacher retention and shortages are intertwined. Often boards focus on the quality of preparation of new teachers, which is a paramount issue. But teachers in their first 3 years of the profession represent less than 10% of the workforce. Maintaining and supporting effective teachers already at work in your district is a key lever. And teachers with 3 to 5 years of experience who are satisfied with their preparation and receive support at the beginning of their careers are less likely to exit the profession early. Internships, instructional coaching, career ladder that lets experienced teachers share their skills while remaining in the classroom are effective policy levers. For example, Iowa's Teacher Leadership and Compensation Program establishes 5 tiers for teachers: initial, career, model, mentor, and lead teacher. Teachers in the later 3 tiers see increased responsibilities, days worked, and stipends. And the survey evidence has provisionally linked that program with increased improved teacher retention and also improvements in instruction and professional climate. There are also a variety of funding streams that you can leverage too to improve the professional learning opportunities for teacher in that school climate, as well as potential on-ramps for teachers too. Michigan is leveraging its Title II funds to create on-ramps for teachers who are currently serving as substitutes or paraprofessionals to become fully certified teachers through residency-based programs. Title II also provides opportunities to use a 3% set-aside to support school leaders too. Nearly half the states are using this. Tennessee will use the funds for competitive grants for teacher leadership, teacher residency programs in high-needs districts. And I have 30 seconds left, so I'll just say thank you so much for having me here today. And I look forward to engaging with you and sharing many more state examples.
10 seconds to go. I'm very impressed. Okay, questions, comments? I think I started there last time, so I'm going to start here this time.
Sure. Thank you all very much for your testimony tonight. I look forward to digging in further too with the written testimony that you provided with all the examples. So I wanted to start first with Ms. Ahrens. You talked about the fact that teachers will stay for great leaders. And I heard Dr. Farabee, our new chancellor, last night say the same thing at a parent meeting. And so my question is, based on your experience with human capital generally, what needs to happen there? How do we get great leaders in all of our school buildings? How do we keep great leaders in all of our school buildings?
So this is also an issue that's little talked about, but we have a retention issue with principals as well. So we are finding that this generation of teachers that has come in take a look at that principal role and they're saying, really, do I really want to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? We've made the principal role almost so impossible that this group of young people is looking at the job saying, I don't think so. So we have both the turnover problem and we have a retention problem with principals, and especially when they are expected to produce student achievement almost overnight. So we work very hard with the pipeline programs that Wallace has supported. 5 of our districts are in the Wallace program. We're working very hard to get people who are teacher leaders to not to have to leave the classroom, but to share the leadership in the schools so that the principal's role is not all-encompassing. And I don't know if that helps you, but it really, we really are looking at the role responsibilities in all of our districts to try and help them parse that out. It is definitely a challenge.
Thank you. Madam President, I'll yield the rest of my time.
Next, anybody else on this side? We'll come back. You don't have to go now. Sure.
Hi, thank you all so much. I also have a question based on something that you mentioned, Ms. Ahrens. You talked about the differentiating between effective and ineffective teachers. And I know here in DC, a lot of teachers talk about impact as one of the, reasons why, one of the factors, right, for leaving. And I'm just wondering if you have, and this is for everybody actually on the panel, if you have insights or suggestions around effective measures for measuring effective teaching.
Well, that is a huge issue, and unless you have a few hours, I think we probably
You have 3
would
minutes.
struggle with that. But I do think that principals and everyone in the building, whether they're a coach, an instructional leader, a staff development teacher, as well as the central office, they all have a responsibility in supporting teachers in improving their practice. That being said, they should not be investing 10, 12, 15 years in trying to improve a teacher that is not showing progress. And I think that's a real struggle because they are afraid that they won't be able to replace that teacher. So they hang in there for a very long time trying to improve the practice. So every system has a different set of criteria that they use for effectiveness. But I think that there is a huge resistance in this country to let go of a teacher because they're so afraid of the shortage behind it.
I would just chime in by saying that I would want to amplify the point that turnover is a big issue, but it's not always a problem because some people leave the profession because they really shouldn't be in a classroom, and they realize that. They may just figure out this is not the right career for them. I think the question on evaluation, though, is really critical, and I think the question to ask is, what is it we're trying to accomplish? Evaluation too often has been either sort of just a requirement that you have to get through. We see this in the workplace, by the way, all the time. This is not something that education deals with only. But I think what we've seen is where the evaluation system can be designed in a collaborative way, and it's designed to improve instruction. It has real meaning and can be useful, I think, as a tool in addressing these issues.
And I just echo everything that's been already articulated, amplifying one particular point too, and that's that an evaluation system is, I think, also linked to building a culture and climate of teacher professional practice too. So you do necessarily have to have that to be able to create the incentives that cause teachers to stay in the profession, such as identifying areas for improvement, even amongst your highly effective teachers. Teachers are always eager for areas that they can grow and continue to learn too. So that evaluation piece is crucial. The one piece I would add is we have a specific issue on teacher turnover in high-needs schools. So I would encourage you to think about your measures of teacher effectiveness too, and if there's a incentive for teachers to go to a higher achieving school because they are perhaps more likely to be rated effective than in a lower achieving school where we need our best teachers.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Parker.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Ms. Ahrens, I'm fascinated by this idea of development over time and when to make a decision of letting teachers go. Obviously, we want to keep as many teachers as possible in the profession. If you could just speak more to what you've learned from other areas or districts around innovative attempts at development, because I actually personally believe that that is more at the heart of some of our teacher turnover, is that either teachers are not adequately being developed and or they are not being developed enough to meet the demands of whatever the accountability systems are. And then if you all could speak to like the unique context of DC, Mr. Jensel, you spoke about like we had deans here from different area schools last week or last month, and they spoke about the need of tracking teacher certifications, but also progress over time. And if you could, obviously that is very unique in DC if we think about policy at a state level, if you could just speak to what you've learned in different contexts and how that might be applied in a DC context, that would be helpful.
Okay. So one of the things that we found really useful is a lot of peer feedback and peer coaching and support for new teachers. We have found that principals cannot be the only one in the building that is responsible for helping a new teacher or any teacher develop, that there are others in the building that should be sharing that responsibility. So we've tried to really institute peer support, peer evaluation, peer feedback. It's really the feedback, not the evaluation so much. It's the feedback as often as possible to support especially a new teacher. What's happened with the accountability systems, as necessary as they are, is that principals are caving in early, and they're fearful of holding on to a new teacher for the entire year even, because they're fearful of the student achievement results being lower than they should be. So we find that they'll let a teacher go in the middle of the year and try and replace them, which is almost impossible. And so we work really hard with how do we help principals understand that new teacher is going to come in and need a great deal of support from everyone, team leader, department chair, whoever is in the building needs to be helping instructionally, because these are not easy jobs, as you all know.
And I know I always run over time. I just want to underscore, I think there's an inherent assumption that our school leaders are content experts and are able to develop teachers. And I think many would tell you quite the opposite. Yeah.
On your other question about the relationship between school systems, the DC public schools and the teacher preparing institutions, I would answer it broadly, and then I'll try to get narrow, although I don't pretend to be an expert in the specific issues you're dealing with. Broadly, I think the context we need to understand is that a lot of those teacher preparing institutions are struggling themselves. Enrollments have dropped pretty dramatically. So we have a challenge just going in, right? Because we want to talk to them about the qualities of the teachers that they produce, and so that there's that relationship that we talked about before. They're looking to just get more students into a program in many cases. That's one challenge. The other one, I think, is, this comes as a shock to all of us, but there's a lot of jargon in our profession here. And there's a certain language for K-12 education, and there's a different language for higher education. So my experience is we don't always necessarily communicate as clearly as we need to. Now, having said all that, to the extent many of your teachers are being prepared by local institutions, that's an opportunity as well, because where you're a school system that's bringing teachers in from a lot of different places, there's a value to that also. But you have the opportunity, I think, to build a more meaningful relationship and talk about some of the issues that I highlighted and that have also been raised by the others.
I missed that, so I'm going to sorry.
Thank you all for your testimony. Just very quickly, I wanted to talk or ask you a quick question. All three of you mentioned incentives and or Ms. Aaron, specifically, you were talking about principals, and principals oftentimes set the culture and tone of a school, and they severely can impact the amount and how much teacher turnover happens at a school. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences and the impact that you've seen with not only principal leadership and mentorship programs, but also teacher leadership and mentorship programs, and ways to assist and incentivize teachers for taking more impactful roles?
So that has been really a tremendous strategy in our category of what we call career management that we ask HR to take on. And one of the things, some of our districts have offered leadership roles, but only at high-need schools, which is one incentive of bringing an experienced teacher into a high-need school. Some of them will offer differentiated compensation, and certainly in DC, you have been a leader in that area of offering differentiated compensation for different roles and and in high-need schools. Some of our districts have offered options to be a leader with a stipend of sharing a classroom. So two teachers, in the morning they teach, in the afternoon they mentor. is another model that we've really seen take hold. And that is doing, if any of you are interested, the Opportunity Culture out of North Carolina has been doing a tremendous amount of work in teacher leadership, where the teachers are sharing the role of mentoring other teachers as well as teaching. It's one way to keep them in the classroom as well as give them leadership opportunities. So we see that as a huge strategy. I have to mention, following up on Mr. Parker's comment, 52% of the teachers that are being hired in our districts are coming through alternative certification. The universities simply are not producing the bulk of the teachers that we need, and they definitely are not producing teachers of color or male teachers. So we are finding that our districts must go to alternative certification, and a number of those teachers come in really basically unprepared, which is another huge retention issue.
I'd want to echo that. I think clearly a differentiated compensation can matter, but of course for a lot of people it's not just about the money. It's I think we've seen some success in districts where they've actually tried to encourage even the high school students who they think have some potential for teaching, to encourage them, to encourage teachers to consider other roles within the school system. Sometimes it's simply a matter of asking. But I just wanted to pick up on something that was just said. We are very concerned about alternative certification. It's not always bad, but it often is a way of just putting somebody in a classroom. And I just want to share a very quick story with you. Our state executive director in Kansas made this comment once, and it stuck with me. He said, we have a physician shortage in western Kansas, and we have a teacher shortage in western Kansas, but nobody suggested that we lower the standard for physicians. And so until we consider teaching to be a true profession, we all believe it, but I think the honest reality is it's not treated that way in too many places. So when we see some of the alternative certification programs, I think we see evidence that that's not happening, and so we have to challenge that whenever we can.
Thank you.
Yes, I taught for 47 years in DCPS and loved every minute of it. And I know that this is a horrible problem that we have in this city. And y'all, and I've got all kinds of notes, but I'm not going to go to because I want your answers as far as mentorship. Because one thing that we don't have in this city is any kind of a mentor program for teachers. And we have in DC, it's almost unique. There's a huge number of retired teachers that still live in DC that would die to come in and help a young teacher, because we know that young teachers don't know anything except for their subject. They have no idea what's going to happen when they go into a class. Let's say it's a high school class, and there are 25 students in that class who are veteran students, and they are rookie teachers. And it takes 5 years for someone to understand how to manage a classroom, much less teach a subject. And we don't have a mentorship program, and that's something that we're working on here, hopefully, to try to get some kind of funding or whatever, volunteers to come in and teach teachers how to teach. Because it doesn't happen, as you said, in the universities, because they're talking theoretical teaching. And the people who come in from other periods in their lives and become teachers with that kind of certification, they don't know what they're doing either. So I'd like you to talk about mentorship, because all of you in your presentation talk about mentors.
Go ahead.
I'll jump in. We have found, and we work very closely with the New Teacher Center in California that is kind of the leader of induction programs, but instructional induction, not just where is the best local pizza, but how to help you in the classroom. It can lower turnover of new teachers by almost 50%. We've seen it over and over again when there is really no mentoring, or there is haphazard mentoring. When we got to New York City, I would get calls from new teachers all the time saying, was I supposed to have a mentor? So it was completely serendipitous who got a mentor and who didn't. So having a systemic program will definitely improve the retention of teachers 1 through 3, especially if you continue that mentoring in the 2nd and 3rd year. So I'm a big proponent. They must be trained. They have to be excellent teachers themselves. They could be retired, definitely, but it's a program that every district should have.
And I'll just echo in too, there's a couple of state examples that have exceptional mentoring and induction programs during that first year of teaching, which is absolutely critical. And those are Delaware, Louisiana, and Iowa too, and we can get you some additional research and examples on that.
Just one other quick thought. I think, and I assume you would agree with this, I think the importance of the mentoring is that it be clear, there be a firewall between that and any kind of evaluation process. I mean, the danger here is you're talking about a new teacher who may not have tenure, depending on the state and the laws for that. So they're kind of on the bubble and they know it, but they have challenges in the classroom. And so I think one of the values of a good mentorship or induction program is it's a safe place to actually talk about some of the problems they're facing and getting some real advice and not be worried that it's going to somehow affect their career, because they need to get those answers then. They can't try to just fake it and hope everything works out. So I think that's a clear lesson that we've learned.
Thank you. Because you can't teach experience.
Right.
Marcus.
Thank you all so much for being here and for all of this valuable information. I had one quick question that I think touched on something that Ms. Potts talked about a little earlier, which is about incentivizing high-quality teachers to go to high schools of need. And you talked a little bit about compensation, but beyond that, whether it be factors in school evaluations or additional supports for the educators specifically inside the building, are there any promising practices about how we incentivize high-quality educators to teach and stay at schools of high need?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the aspects, too, that you want to look at when you're, I'll touch on a couple of issues, too, but I think as you explore the data that you're tracking on teacher retention, it's important to think about what you mean by teacher retention, too. Are you talking about retention at the school level, at the district level, and what are the pathways that teachers take? So ideally, what do we want to work for? We want to have our new teachers with the least amount of experience be supported by teachers in schools that are maybe higher achieving schools too. And as teachers gain experience and become more effective, we want to be pairing that great skill with our greatest need, those high need schools. So that's the track that we want to see across the nation. That's not the track that we actually see. But there are a couple of examples there. We talked a lot about the empower of the school principal to create a culture of support, informal feedback, empowering teachers to mentor their peer teachers, that kind of ability for the principal to create that workspace where teachers look at student work, engage in collaborative, kind of a shared responsibility for achievement overall. That's what we want to try to create in our highest need schools. So first off, how do we incentivize principals to get to our highest need schools, and how do we incentivize teachers to then come to that great culture with some stellar challenges and some great work to be done?
And quickly, how do you balance the need for the district to want to do that, right? To want to move staff around where the high need is, with obviously a school leader's motivation to want to keep those high quality educators?
Exactly. So there are a wide variety of levers that you can take, but I think I'll give one example too, because I know time's limited. On the state board, don't underestimate your power of not just mandating new policies or implementing new policies, but the power of the bully pulpit too. How do you as a state board kind of raise up and champion those already effective or highly effective teachers and school leaders in high need schools? Those are the people that you should be bringing forward to your state board. Those are the people that you put on committees. Give them greater responsibilities. The same thing as those teachers are looking for their principals. It's not just the principal who can offer it, it's you also as a state board.
And I would not undervalue compensation that goes along with those responsibilities. And it can't be like $2,000. It's got to be $10,000. We did $10,000 in New York. I think you all have done a significant differentiated compensation at some of your high-need schools. But they say either $10,000 to $15,000. And then in New York, we did $25,000 for a principal to be incentivized. Charlotte-Mecklenburg is also a good place to look at. They've done a lot of this kind of work of incentivizing great leaders and teachers to go to the highest needs schools.
Thank you.
Okay, my turn. So I want to start with Ms. Ahrens because you raised something, I guess, most explicitly and first, but others did too, which is this issue of turnover versus quality, that you don't want every teacher to stay, you don't, and so on. We have a very unique situation in DC. We have a very tough evaluation system, and we have no tenure. Teachers in this city, if they don't meet if they don't get a good evaluation 2 years in a row, they're out. So we don't. We have a kind of an opposite problem in a way. Not to say that there aren't teachers who shouldn't be there. We know, everybody doesn't do a perfect job, but the one piece of information that, and I'm talking now about DC Public Schools, tracked for years was the percentage of highly effective teachers based on their evaluation that stayed, and it was super high. It was 90%. But meanwhile, what has now been revealed, which we did through our report, is that not counting that percentage of people, everybody else was turning over at super high rates, and in the low-income schools, I don't know if you heard at the beginning, it's on average, I think it's a third leave each school each year, and in Ward 8, the turnover at 5 years, I think, is 75%. It's unbelievable. It's extraordinary. And one of the reasons, we know anywhere there's very high turnover in high poverty schools because it's a hard environment to teach, and we heard from some people earlier about some of the issues around trauma and so on. One of the issues in DC, which you've talked about, is we want to give people, we have differentiated compensation. You get, I think, an extra $10,000. Someone here can, if you're highly rated and you go to a high poverty school. But people don't want to go to high poverty schools because there's a belief, true or not, nobody's looked at it, that if you go to high poverty schools, that the evaluation instrument is disproportionately unfair to teachers in those schools. And so what you have, among other things, is you have the differentiated compensation. People don't want to take advantage of it. And secondly, people want to leave those schools voluntarily before they get pushed out, which may be one of the reasons that it gets pushed out. So I just wanted to sort of put that there. We're a very unique district, and the kinds of things we need to understand and do aren't necessarily exactly the same as everywhere else. That said, on the data question, we'll come back because we have another round, which I hope will be more focused on data, is I'm really interested in what you can tell us about exit surveys, because I think that might help us get to this. And yeah, issues around that. So let me just stop there. Do other people want to get in for another round? And then we'll come back to this, to the actual question. Others on another round? Jack? Oh, yeah.
Thank you all for spending your evening with us. I really appreciate it. DC, especially some of our most challenging schools, have a lot of temporary teachers that come in and do a 2-year community service cycle. Do you find that has any impact on teacher retention or this culture of a school?
It's a tough question. So mostly Teach for America, TNTP are the national organizations that provide most of the 2 to 3 year teachers. We've worked very, very hard with Teach for America, and they have worked too in trying to retain longer than 2 years, even though their mission statement says it's a 2-year contribution before you go on to be a doctor or a lawyer. But we have found that that in a number of cases, when retention practices by principals in central office are going in the right direction, you can retain those teachers sometimes for a much longer period of time. And in some of our districts, we've been able to see them be retained for 5 and 8 years. I would rather have a great teacher for 3 years than have an underperforming teacher for 10. So I want to just say I'm still a great proponent of alternative certification pipelines like TFA, because I think they do produce a great deal in the years that they are there, whether they leave or not. But we do talk to principals a lot who are exhausted from the constant churn of every 2 years. They just get somebody where they need them to be, and they're off.
Any additional input? And
No,
that's okay.
I mean, we've heard similar things. We've not done separate research on that, but I think that's right. I do think the issue of quality of teaching is at the core of this discussion, and the concern we would have is just, if I may just quickly comment on your question, because I think it relates to it. It goes back to the nature of the evaluation itself. And as I said before, if it's directed to try to improve the instruction, and it's a supportive mechanism, I think it can assist in this matter. Unfortunately, in a lot of places, that's not always the case, and that's not always a decision that the school district can even control. But I think it all relates to people having buy-in to the system and trying to be supportive of each other in achieving that success.
And I just add that this is where data is essential, right? So to the earlier point too about Teach for America programs and the New Teacher Project programs too, it's really about where are schools retaining those teachers past that 2-year commitment. Yeah. What are the professional practices going on in that school? And when you have data, you can identify those situations, bring those schools in to have conversations person to person about what's happening there so we can spread those best practices across the district.
Thank you. And President Wattenberg, if I could take my second 3 minutes, I won't use all of it, I promise. Okay. My follow-up question is for Ms. Ahrens, which was the changing workforce. I'm 41, and I just started my 7th real career job 2 months ago. 2 months ago on Saturday it will be. So can you talk a little bit more about the shift in how long people stay at a job? And I won't even say in a career, but at a job.
We do a fair amount. We do academies twice a year for states, for our districts, and even for up-and-coming human capital leaders. And in all of those, we spend time on millennials and what's happening. They're going to be 52% of the workforce next year. So we need to get a grip on this. And we've done a lot of research, or read a lot of research about what they need, what they want. They are looking immediately for leadership roles, almost the minute they walk in the door. Instead of saying, well, I think I'll spend 5 years thinking about being a teacher and trying to be good, they will talk immediately about what does it take to be a leader in this school or in this district. They have a mission. They really want to make their lives and the kids' lives better. And I think they are very mission-driven, so that has to be a part of their world. They are easily distracted, so you cannot put them in a session for 3.5 hours in which someone is lecturing at them about better practices for methodology.
I'm the same, by the way.
And they will switch careers multiple times. So what really, and this is not anything you or any of us can solve, but the pension system is really not designed for this generation. They are not going to stay 30 years. And it's a shame that they walk out of the district with very little in their pocket because they've paid into a pension system that they will never get back from. So when we talk to funders, we always say, if you really want to help us, buy us out of the pension system, because it's killing the systems that they're going to go bankrupt. They just are not getting the leverage that they need from the younger teachers. So we work really hard on what human resources should be doing to adjust their practices in terms of both candidates as well as new hires, new teachers, and then more experienced teachers, because they are different.
Thank you, and I'm going to yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Parker?
Yes, I will be brief. As a millennial, as well as a former teacher that went the alternative route, I will say I challenge the notion of effectiveness being the direct cause of tenure. And I appreciate, Ms. Ahrens, you mentioning that while we would ideally want to see tenure correlate, and it often does, with effectiveness, that is not always the case. And so with that, it has been my understanding by research and even in experience that effectiveness is more a result of the quality of applicant pools, whatever that alternative route or certification program one may have gone through, but also the quality of training that they may have received. And so I guess my question to you all would be, what data have you seen as it relates to who's actually pursuing the career of being a teacher? There has been data to suggest that some programs are finding it hard, as you mentioned, to find quote-unquote quality applicants and the impact that that may have, as well as the quality of training that is either happening in districts, in schools. Having PD is not the same as quality, effective training, as you know. And so any data that may suggest the impact that those two things may have on teacher turnover.
I'm going to start by talking about a topic that's not directly related to your question, but I promise I'll get there. And first, I think it's important that we kind of ground this in what's the context and data that we do know about the teacher workforce, right? It's changed significantly over time. A recent report talked about it both being greener and grayer. And so how could that possibly be? The teaching workforce has increased exponentially. It's increased at a much faster rate than student enrollment has across this nation. As a result, many new teachers are entering into the profession. So it's greener with less experience, but also our veteran teachers have accumulated, that stay in the profession, accumulated more experience, that grayer aspect too. So why I want to mention that is that I think it's important as we look at numbers about the decline in the number of students who are pursuing teaching as a profession, we also have the context that the profession overall has grown substantially over the past trend of years. So that being said, I think there's also an important point here for Grow Your Own programs that states have done too, to encourage students who are currently in their K-12 program to pursue teaching as a profession. And there's a whole discussion that we should have about the caliber and prestige of teaching as a profession itself to encourage those students to take that opportunity.
I just want to make a comment that I hope is responsive to your question, but I think at least it's related, which is I think we need to do a better job of engaging more people, and I appreciate very much this conversation, but engaging other stakeholders in this debate. In some of the places where the teacher shortage, I mean, I agree there are more teacher positions, but a lot of places they're empty, right? We're having trouble recruiting. And in some cases, it's a salary issue. Other cases, there may be other incentives that are needed. And we're seeing some examples where the business community recognizes this as a real issue. It's a quality of life issue in that community, and that's a big part of their investment. And so I just worry sometimes that a lot of the meetings I go to, it's a lot of folks like us talking to each other about the challenges that we're having. This impacts communities, and I think people need to recognize the struggles that school systems are having, and we need to offer opportunities for them to be a part of that discussion. And that takes different forms in different places, but I just make sure we're not too insular in the conversation that we're having about these challenges, because I think people do care when they are confronted with the facts and given opportunities to participate in the discussion.
the elephant in the room, as far as I'm concerned in DC, is the evaluation, the teacher evaluation system, the impact. It's called impact, and that's all I'm going. I just want you to comment on, and I think it's a horrible system that doesn't reward teachers correctly, and teachers teach in fear. They're not able to teach their own subjects. They have to prepare students for the PARCC test, and teaching is sort of thrown out of the room. And how, I just would like your comments on that.
Okay. So when Impact first came about, I think what we had hoped to see in the accountability movement was that teachers would be rewarded for growth. And that, back to your statement, Ms. Wattenberg, was that it wasn't meant to say if you don't achieve at a certain level your students, you're not going to be evaluated effectively or highly effective. But the idea was to have growth, and that even if your students were way below grade level, you would still get credit for that growth. I thought Impact had that built into it. I could be wrong, but I do recall that the growth component was not meant to be punitive. It was meant to show that your students were gaining a year's growth for a year's effectiveness, or even more. The amount of observations that were built in originally, as you recall, did bring in mentors and retirees to come in and do a second or a third observation. I think financially that could not continue, so that might be a lack in the original program now, because maybe you don't have a second or a third opinion coming into the classroom. I will tell you that across the country, many of our systems, many of our states are looking at abandoning student achievement as one of the components of evaluation. We're looking at companies that have abandoned evaluation altogether, because what we really need is feedback. Our teachers need feedback. It needs to be quality feedback. It needs to be frequent feedback. And it needs to have areas where they can actually incorporate and improve their practice. And I think we've gotten very far away from that. And believe me, principals will agree. They would much rather go in a classroom and provide feedback and not have to go home and write 5 observation reports until 2 in the morning. So they're suffering too. And I think what we did was we got so involved with teacher evaluation as the silver bullet that we've really lost the purpose of it. So it's not just here in DC. It's everywhere.
I'd like to add on to that. I totally agree with it. But I want to put on the table the reality that we've also seen in the past teacher evaluation systems that were virtually meaningless, really. And so when you had 98% of all teachers who were rated excellent or something, I mean, that's a sign that that's not a very effective evaluation system either. I agree. I think this was a very slippery slope to talk about student achievement. On one hand, as a basis of teacher evaluation, on one hand, it sounds really good. I mean, the teacher is in the classroom with those kids, so how are those kids doing? And we ought to have, there should be some accountability back to the teacher. I was here earlier for the earlier panel, and I think that alone gives you great pause as to all the other influences and challenges that teachers are facing, to be held accountable for all of that based on the student's performance. By the way, the student's performance on a test that also is often suspect in terms of measuring actual knowledge gained in the classroom. But we digress. Maybe that's another panel. So I guess my point is, I think the evaluation systems have to be meaningful, but there has to be confidence in them as well. And I would argue that that's not just true in the classroom. I think that's true wherever people work. If you're going to be evaluated, you want to have some confidence that the evaluation instrument is fair, that it's asking the right question, but fundamentally, it should be about improvement. It should be about feedback and helping a teacher in this case, or an employee in this case, do their job better. And if that's not the goal of the evaluation system, then I think you have we have a much larger problem on our hands. So I think we fall victim sometimes to needing some kind of measures to report out, and that's valid. The public's paying for all of this, so I'm not arguing that. But the issue we're talking about tonight is, I think, about helping teachers do a better job, and I don't think the instrument, I'm not an expert in your instrument, so I don't want to pretend that, but we do see this in a lot of places, that the instrument itself is not designed to do that.
So I just add to that, the purpose of an evaluation system is critical to think about here too. It's not just evaluation for the sake of evaluation, but to echo the earlier points too. It's what do you want to do with that data? How do you want to make it actionable? What are you thinking to change here? And use those measures which help promote action too. So, I mean, there's a lot of conversation too about evaluation systems across the states. There's a lot of kind of maybe stepping back from looking at student achievement. But I would also encourage us that the best thing that we can do is to keep researching, keep working on evaluation systems. There's not one out there that's perfect yet across these states. We're learning new ways to measure student growth. We're learning new ways to observe in classrooms. There's always new research out there. So I would say that the continual refinement, as changes have been made to the impact system, they continue to be made by hearing from practitioners, by looking at research and data and evidence. And then the last thing I think I'll just echo too is one of the benefits of the system is this ability to differentiate between teachers too. As Thomas has mentioned too, there are some evaluation systems out there where all teachers are rated highly effective. So you do have the fundamental pennies here of being able to make some differentiations amongst your teachers with, if you have a purpose for what you hope to do with that data, is an important first step.
Thank you. One more question for you. One thing the State Board is considering is whether we seek more research on the problem of teacher retention and turnover, or whether we use our pulpit for something else. Research on teacher turnover is something we did, and obviously there's more to know. But as you all think about what is known about the issues of teacher turnover, teacher retention, et cetera, how would you advise state boards on how to proceed?
So I'll chime in first here, and I'm sure my colleagues will give excellent advice too. So for example, I think Illinois did a year of study before they came up with a series of recommendations around this particular issue. For state boards of education, it's essential that you define exactly what your policy issue is that you're trying to design a solution around. So is it teacher retention when it's large? Is it teacher retention in high-need schools? Is it teacher retention for diverse school leaders at high-need schools? What exactly is that? And that purpose, that kind of finding out and being able to articulate the exact problem will help you design a policy solution for that problem.
Thank you.
I totally agree. I think sometimes we talk about this in very broad terms. There's a lot of turnover in a lot of positions. Excuse by any means, but in this country right now, there are about 7 million unfilled jobs. So there's a lot of demand on the workforce generally. And there are also incentives for people to leave the teaching profession because of other potential career opportunities. And it's not necessarily because they weren't necessarily a successful teacher. So I agree totally that I think we have to be talking specifically about the issues you're trying to resolve and collect that data and use that for the decision making.
So I totally think this is extreme. When we work with our 16 states, we are always talking about power metrics. What are the metrics you should have at hand that all of you and everyone in your district is very aware of? We call it all eyes on the cabinet level. So, and teacher retention in many forms is one of it. As I said at my very outset, it's a very complex issue, and it has to be sliced and diced in a number of ways. But definitely, I think it is data that you would want to have and to help your schools really to inform their practice and help them develop strategies and solutions where you see the data is problematic.
Thank you.
I think it's me again. Okay. So I just want to start by saying, in fairness, I think the issues with impact, some of it is the testing, but I think at this point it's also other issues. So I don't want you to leave with that impression. But you ended with, so what are the metrics that we need? And in the end, that's sort of where we're trying to focus. And so let me put that in two ways. One is, what can you say about exit surveys? Just something that we're looking at, and thinking of the DC context, the various kinds of things we would want to understand. Why are people leaving? Where are they going? And the second is the state-local issue, and for us, it's also charter schools. How does that work in most places? The local agency gets the data, reports it to a state agency. Does the state create a system? How does that typically work? So those are...
Definitely, they ask every charter and every school district to provide that data to them in whatever form it comes. It should be by a variety of, as I said, lenses that you look at around around exit data, but that's retention as well.
In places that do local districts report their turnover data to the state by the school level, so that's because we don't have that, and that's one of the things we're looking at. So that would be something we'd ask the districts to do to send to the state. Yep. Okay.
And then the other thing about exit surveys, I'm going to throw something out that I used in one of my districts when I headed up HR. We actually asked the union to help us do an exit survey. And it was because in many cases, teachers are fearful when they leave. If the reason is a poor culture, not feeling supported, they're very afraid that someone will find out. So either the survey has to be anonymous, or we ask the union to help us out and to actually administer the survey so that the teacher did not feel that it would be shared with their administrator. Because again, they might want to return to the district, they might need a recommendation to go to the next job, et cetera. So however it's done, it almost has to be anonymous.
And how typically does it work? In other words, each LEA is asked, please ask, here's 10 questions, or does it tend to be a in-person survey or a mix of that?
No, it's usually done online. It's done online.
As teachers leave.
Mm-hmm.
It strikes me that there are two parts to this conversation, though. One is the collection of the data, or who's leaving, and you have that. But the other question is why? What's behind that? So is it moving to some other career opportunity, or your family's moving? There might be a lot of other reasons, and I think that's more of a local district issue to try to understand. The state's probably more looking at just sort of the gross data and what the trends are around the state. But I think school administration needs to be focused on the second part.
So I also echo too that, the reason that most teachers leave would be dissatisfaction, right? So we have about 30% of teachers who would leave for kind of health reasons, changing family, changing when to move, but the predominant number of teachers who leave early in their career cite dissatisfaction. So unpacking that and understanding it, but I also want to make sure when you collect that data, you're going to be able to act upon that data. So dissatisfied teachers who are not very effective, are you going to act on that data? Are you looking for where effective teachers are that are relatively effective in their first years of teaching that are leaving, and unpacking and understanding why that case is. So I want to make sure that you get data that you can act upon. The other thing I would also encourage, just to throw it out there too, is a working condition survey too, of teachers who are actively employed too. We've cited, I think, repeatedly across this table, the importance of culture and climate and the working conditions of a school to promote retention. We also know that there are sometimes disconnects between teachers' perceptions of a working conditions and principals' perceptions of a working condition. And so unpacking those with transparent data so principals can act and resolve those gaps, that's actionable information.
All right. I think Marcus is our last person. Did you want to get back in? All right, so Marcus and then Emily, and then you guys can go home.
Thank you. Just very quickly, and I know this is a sticky question because correlation and causation are just sticky issues, right? But when it comes to teacher retention or teacher turnover, is there any quantifiable trend that you've seen that directly links kind of the turnover rates to school or student achievement?
So we've actually seen the opposite. We have a number of our districts that have studied when a teacher leaves one building and goes to another. And often the principal or others will make the excuse the teacher's looking for an easier assignment. But actually, we have not seen that come through in the data. We've seen teachers that have moved from one high-need school to another high-need school. And whenever you find that, you've got to look at the leadership and the culture in one building as opposed to another. And I think often they're several blocks away from one building to another. So we encourage our districts strongly to study their transfer data, voluntary transfers. Where are they coming from? Where are they going to? It's a different kind of turnover, but it tells you a whole lot. And then when you see consistent 25% turnover in one building year after year, that is a place where you need the area superintendent or whomever is helping to support that principal. There needs to be better retention in that building.
Emily.
Thank you. Actually, this is a follow-up to Ms. Wattenberg's question to you. One thing we've been discussing too is just whether or not it would be valuable to actually survey or do focus groups with teachers who are not necessarily leaving, but just to sort of ask them similar questions about why are they staying, or are you considering leaving, and whether, we did it anonymously or not. I just was wondering if you've had experience with that kind of survey as well, and if you could speak to that.
We actually have a tool that we give our districts that we call the STAY survey. So that's really right on point, and we really work with principals to try and literally talk to every single teacher every year to say, tell me what you're thinking, and are you thinking of leaving, or can you share with me if you are? And I want you to know that I want you to stay. So they have a huge responsibility in that year-to-year succession planning that they have to do in their own building. But we really believe in stay surveys. Good point.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. And I assume we can be in touch with you guys. We have a lot of follow-up to go. This is terrific.
Thank you.
Thanks on behalf of all of us. And let me say to my colleagues, I had been under the impression that this meeting was to adjourn at 8, and it's actually was supposed to be at 7:30, so I apologize. So let's move very quickly to the next sets of items. First, we have a resolution formally establishing the State Board priorities. Second, we have adoption of the proposed budget enhancements that can fund these priorities. And third, a bylaw that strengthens transparency around potential board member conflicts of interest. I was going to make some introductory remarks, but I think I will sort of pass on them, other than to say that the priorities are not new. They build on our past work. And they form the basis of a lot of the budget for next year, the substantive basis, I would say, for the work of next year. Let me say one technical point. The State Board's budget is not like other agencies. The State Board sets a yearly need for appropriations to the mayor, which is then transmitted to the council. We also submit additional requests for funding for areas beyond the original submission. These items are called the enhancements, and tonight we're considering a slate of these enhancement requests that will be submitted to the council at our budget hearing next week. Most have been discussed at meetings since the fall. One that is substantial is an increase in the research funds. Okay. To support the different priorities that we have. So let me, so first we have the priorities resolution. SR 19, the priorities resolution. Okay, so would someone like to move that?
So moved.
Second.
Where is my, okay, any discussion? Or second?
Yes, second.
Any discussion?
Want to read it?
Just had a clarifying question.
Yes.
My understanding is these priorities could be changed at any time by the will of the board, correct?
I mean, I suppose,
Thank you.
in
That's
fact,
helpful.
in fact, they can be, but they are meant to be setting us forward on a course that's based on the discussions we had and to put it on some paper, have some commitment to it. That's the gist. Okay, seeing no further, do we need to have it read? Jack?
I think it should be read since we don't have a written transcript.
Okay,
The only
great.
way to get a transcript is to look online.
Okay, terrific.
Through
Okay,
YouTube.
I'm going to ask Mr. Battle to now read the resolution.
After the initial.
State Board of Education resolution on establishing of priorities SR 19-5. Whereas the DC State Board of Education is a government agency that depends on the continued support of the public in order to determine and direct its activities. Whereas SBO understands that public policy decisions create trade-offs and unintended consequences, that the full extent of the consequences, positive and negative, become clearer upon implementation and over time, and that these policies should be reviewed and researched. Whereas SBO is uniquely positioned to hear from both experts and stakeholders, to give voice to diverse stakeholder questions and concerns by undertaking research and promoting community discussion, and to suggest solutions based on this research and discussion. Whereas SBO approved the School Transparency and Reporting STAR framework and school report card in 2017 and 2018 respectively. Whereas the first results of the STAR framework and first iteration of the school report card were released in December 2018, whereas SBO released a report on teacher and principal retention in October 2018 and has adopted education standards in multiple subjects with some needed review or revision. Whereas SBO's efforts related to the high school graduation requirements task force recommendations and credit recovery continue, and whereas SBO should set goals and priorities in a transparent manner so that the public can hold members accountable for accomplishing or failing to accomplish these goals. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education will focus its research and public input efforts on continuing our review on the STAR framework and related issues, the turnover of teachers and principals in DC and retention efforts, the use of state standards with a focus on the provision of rich curriculum in science, social studies, and the arts, especially at the lower grades, credit recovery and the recommendations of the high school graduation requirements task force, and the review of state standards. Be it therefore resolved that the DC State Board of Education will report on the status of these priorities in its annual report at the end of calendar year 2019.
Okay, further discussion on the resolution?
I've been to every meeting, and I don't remember when we discussed the use of standards with a focus on the provision of rich curriculum in science, social studies, and the arts, especially in the lower grades. When did we have this discussion?
We discussed it at the retreat. We have one of our working groups is on it, and it was listed as part of the, it was in both the list of research topics and the, I believe the monthly meeting calendar that we discussed at the last meeting.
But since we don't have authority over curriculum, why would that be part of our resolution?
Oh, it's not, it's the use of the standards. It's whether or not the standards in the, I mean, the big question that's been raised time and time again by a lot of people in a lot of different situations is whether or not kids are getting adequate social studies, science, and art instruction.
I understand that.
And that relates to the standards that we have set in those subjects. And so that was the concern, is how to look at whether or not that broad curriculum is being broadly provided.
I disagree, but I disagree that that's under our purview, and therefore I don't think it should be here, but that's
Okay. I mean, I'll just say we adopt the standards. It seems like it's very much within our purview to understand whether or not they are being observed. And I would say it's something that Jack has raised a number of times with regard to the health standards and other standards. As we adopt the standards, are they, we adopt policies, what's happening with them? So I would put it very much in that bucket.
Madam President, since my name was invoked, I'm all for us examining standards. I don't believe that this board decides on curriculum, and I think it's the word curriculum that is at question here.
It really shouldn't. It should be education. It should not say curriculum, actually. Yeah, that's,
You accept
so
that
let's
as
make
a friendly
that
amendment?
change. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Sorry. No, you're absolutely right.
Then I make the friendly amendment, and I assume it's acceptable
Yeah.
to the first and second, to the mover and second.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues.
Sorry, Karen, I didn't understand that the objection was specifically to that word. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Okay, all those in favor?
Madam President?
Yes.
Are there amendments?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so it's an amendment to insert in line 40 and appropriate revisions after the word review, because that is something that we've talked about, is the revisions as necessary, doing them. And I might note that in particular, we've talked about doing them in social studies because we've had a number of people come talk to the board about the need for that. And in line 41, insert new text to read, serving as a voice for DC families on key educational issues. Okay, all those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
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 The amendment needs to be moved and seconded.
What? Okay.
Also move.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? The ayes have it. It is adopted. Okay, next.
Right.
We did them.
Yes, now you have to move the underlying.
Okay, now we're voting on the underlying resolution. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the resolution say aye.
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 And all those opposed, no. Okay, the resolution is adopted. Okay, now we are going to take up the revised package of enhancement requests that, if approved, will be sent to the council for review. The requests reflect the issue priorities outlined in the previous motion, in particular with a substantially enhanced focus on research, as well as longstanding efforts to strengthen our outreach efforts with a new staff member focused on community engagement. I would like a motion on adoption of the enhancement list.
So moved.
Second.
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 Discussion.
Madam President, I apologize because I will need to leave the meeting momentarily, but I wanted to simply state for the record the concerns that I raised with this group as well as other staff of the board about the research request. Specifically, and in sum, my concerns are that sort of threefold. One, it's a very large request in a year that we are seeing an enormous amount of concern over budget cuts to our schools. So I wonder about the optics of our asking for such a large request in the wake of so many schools experiencing budget cuts for services to students directly. My second concern lies with the role we'll play in research in light of the council's recent decision to allocate $500,000 for the establishment of a research practice partnership. While I certainly understand that our research could be different and or additive to that work, I do think that our city has just made a recent large investment in research, and that this may, again, the optics of that may be ill-received by the council. And then sort of finally, I want to make sure that we've considered the implications on the staff of the board, as well as the board itself, that if we make an ask for this amount of money, that we're prepared to do studies that will fully expend these funds within the course of a year, and that our staff has the adequate time and resources to both put out competitive RFPs for large research studies, as well as to manage the oversight of those contracts. So I've shared those with this board. I'd said it for the record. That's my take on this.
Thank you. Additional discussion? Mr. Jacobson?
I want to express my support of the Ombudsman and Student Advocates requests and the majority of the State Board's requests, but I will not be supporting the budget. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, discussion?
Thank you, Madam President. I'll just say to my colleagues, I'll be voting in favor of this request. I think our body has demonstrated, I think, success in using the resources that we've been allocated to really not only do our achieve our statutory responsibilities, but to also add to the conversation around public education in our city. And while I am empathetic to Dr. Sutter's concern around the creation of the new research body, I'll say I think it's been also an interest to evaluate some of the things that this board has been doing, which I think is a very worthwhile venture, especially at this juncture in our city's education space. And I think to also double down on the work that we've been doing around teacher retention, but to also take on new work. And we understand that that's going to be a load, but I believe truly that it's necessary work that won't be filled in any other space but this elected body of education representatives. And so I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of the revised enhancements so that this board can ever increase its work on behalf of children and families in the district. So thank you.
Other discussion? Mr. O'Leary?
I would just like to add that we've been working hard on this teacher retention piece. And it seems to me that if not us, then who? That's what I'd like to
add. Ms. Gassoy?
I would also just sort of add to what Mr. O'Leary said, that I'll just be very specific, actually, that, you know, when I try to explain to constituents what we do and what we can do for them, I was in a school today where they were very upset about their budget, and they asked me outright, what are you going to do with what we tell you? And, you know, so I explained that we play an advocacy role, that we are a conduit for their voices, right, to decision making. But it wasn't until I talked about it, I gave them the example of the teacher turnover research, that I saw this light of recognition, and it resonated like, oh, that makes sense. That's something that's actually concrete and that was useful. And I explained how it was used and how it got traction. And so I think, you know, in thinking about how we raise sort of the visibility and, you know, the influence of the State Board of Education, I think this is vital, actually. And I would just say, I mean, I thought that Jessica's point about the optics, I appreciate that. But this school where I was speaking, this is a school that was asking for twice that much to, you know, just make their ends meet in one school. So it made me realize that this is a drop in the bucket, really. It's not a huge amount that we're asking for.
Thank you. Other comments, Ms. Williams?
$240,000 will have to come from some school or take away from some educational process. So we're asking for a huge amount of money. I'm not saying that we can't do research, but do we need $240,000 to do it is my question. And what school are you taking this from?
Other comments, and then I'll respond.
I just would
Parker?
quickly mention, Madam President, it's been often said that our city's budget reflects our values, and what better to speak to our values than an appreciation and a better understanding of our teachers and improved outcomes. I fully support this in the grand scheme of things. $240,000 is not a big ask. I think if it is seen as though we're taking money from schools, that's problematic in and of itself, given the amount of money that is in the bucket and the many ways that it's been divided. I would also say we are an independent body, and we have presented ourselves to investigate, research, and follow through on independent topics, i.e. teacher retention, that no other body in the city is taking up. And in terms of demand on staff, I would imagine that this supplemental funding would add to the staffing supports to lessen the impact and the strain of further investigation. So I say all that to say it was made clear by a panel tonight. It was made clear in our working group. We all know the many questions we have around teacher retention as well as a host of other areas. And I think I would be remiss not to mention that in a mayoral control system, one that I support, mind you, politics is very much involved. And so it is not to assume that investigations elsewhere would follow what we, an elected body by our people, would want to further. So with that, I fully support this and hope others would do the same.
Others? So let me just say thank you for those comments. They are all helpful. Just respond to a couple things. One, there are budget cuts every year to our schools, every single year. It is a shame, and it is unfortunate, and it is true every single year. We face this. So I think that part of what we need to be able to do is to sort of talk about the kinds of issues that are facing our schools so that they can be addressed. And I also want to say to do the job that we want to do with the amount of sort of the issues that we are required to address, including ESSA. We've put the teacher turnover issue on our plate, and everybody is very happy that we have done so. We need to be able to review these things, and I think this is a very reasonable budget for doing so, and I appreciate the comments, both the support and the reminders that we better do a good job doing it. So thank you all. If there are no other comments, I will call vote. All those in favor?
I request a roll call vote, Madam President.
Okay. Okay. All those in, okay, you're going to call the roll? Okay.
Board Member Gasoy.
Yes.
Board Member Jacobson.
Nay.
Board Member Wattenberg.
Aye.
Board Member O'Leary.
Aye.
Board Member Parker. Board Member Sutter.
She left.
Board Member Sutter. Board Member Williams.
Nay.
Board Member Batchelor.
Aye.
Board Member McClay. Board Member McClay. Board Member, Student Representative Alicia. Student Representative Alicia. Student Representative Robinson.
Nay.
Madam Chair, there are 5 yeas and 3 nays.
Thank you. The motion passes. Tatiana's vote, I don't think it's handled in the.
So there are 2 nays.
2 nays, yeah, thank
Correct,
you.
it's just 2.
Yeah.
2 nays.
Okay, thank you, everybody. All right, moving on. The State Board has been conducting a review and update of its bylaws. The revised bylaws were adopted last month, but members requested additional time to discuss and revise proposed conflict of interest provisions. Before we begin discussion, we will need a motion on the provisions.
I so move.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion? Mr. Battle, would you read the proposed conflict of interest provision?
7.2. 7.2 Conflict of Interest. Elected officials shall not act on or decide any matter in which there is a conflict or potential conflict created by their financial, personal, family, business, or client interest. Failure to disclose or violations of this section may be cause for censure or reprimand by the State Board. If a member believes that a conflict of interest exists or that it appears to exist, they must submit a written explanation of the conflict and their recusal from related matters to the Executive Director of the State Board. The Executive Director shall announce any relevant conflicts of interest or recusal prior to adoption of the agenda at each public meeting. Within 45 days of the adoption of this provision and subsequently no later than March the 1st each year, members shall provide to the Executive Director a list of organizations, including but not limited to schools, agencies, or organizations operating in or connected to the District of Columbia education space with which they have a formal connection, including as but not limited to employee, contractor, consultant, or board member. This list shall be included on the SBOE website in a separate tab labeled Conflicts of Interest under About SBOE.
Thank you. Is there further discussion on the provision?
Madam President. To the motioner and the seconder, is it possible, if you're amenable to it, to include a friendly amendment on line 16, replacing the words conflict of interest with board transparency?
Who's the maker? Jeff?
I would consider that friendly.
Thank you.
Does the second?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Robbins.
Any other discussion? Mr. Jacobson?
I want to thank my colleagues for working on this with me. This is my 3rd go-around with really making sure that the bodies on which I serve reflect our values. I did this first as an ANC member, and then in the first iteration of amendments to bylaws. And I think this really shows that we're not just talking the talk, we're walking the walk with making sure that we're being very transparent and very open. It's no secret that I've had problems with former board members and colleagues on this board who've had what to me seem conflicts I believe one of our former board members was president of Park when Park was being administered in our schools, and I found that that was problematic. We had a board member who had started a nonprofit and was entering into contracts with schools, and I found that problematic. And I've not been shy about telling those board members that they need to be more transparent about that sort of thing. So I really appreciate everyone working with me. This isn't to say that board members shouldn't be working on other things. We all have to have other jobs, but I think this really shows that we value this board, we value the authority that comes with our positions, and I don't want to have this board or my colleagues facing issues that are currently happening in the council with council members who don't seem to be operating in the best interest of their constituents at all times. So I appreciate everyone's assistance with refining the language here, and I hope we vote to pass this. Thank you.
If there's no other discussion, I will just say a big thank you to Jack and to the colleagues that worked with him, because I know a number of people have been working together to make sure we come up with something that everybody finds appropriate and useful, and that's just great. Okay, seeing no other discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The ayes have it, the provision is adopted, and we end on a unanimous vote, but we're not adjourning yet. Yes? No, it was just friendly. Okay, thanks to everybody. With that, I declare us adjourned, and the time is not 3 o'clock.
I'd like to make a motion, we adjourn.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, thank you.
Second.
Okay, then I announce that we are adjourning. It's 8:25 p.m. on March 20th. All in? Aye.
You did really good up till then.
Thank you all.